Welcome to episode 139 of Radio 815, the podcast dedicated to discussing the work of writer director J.J. Abrams. I'm your host for this week. My name is Marcelo Inostroza, joined as always by my fellow co host, Matt Crandall. And on today's show, we'll continue our journey through the past as we take a look at the miniseries 11/22/63. Specifically, we'll be looking at episode 2 today, entitled The Killing Floor. So, Matt, I have a question. Do you want to go to the butcher's?
Nope. Hard pass. So this episode, last week, we left off with our hero as he realized that maybe he could intervene and save his old buddy from going through a lot of heartache because his friend in the present time told him a story about how his entire family was murdered on Halloween 1960. And so we are here on like October 28th, 1960, and Jake thinks, if I stick around, maybe I can find a way so that Harry's entire family doesn't get murdered by his psychopath father, played by Josh Duhamel. And last week I mentioned how Jake, when he was in the past, placed a bet, and he placed a bet for like too much. Like an idiot would do this if you want to get found out. And so when he decides that he's maybe going to intervene and start to investigate, again, as played by James Franco, I think this character is a fucking moron because he starts asking some questions about this family that are too specific and too invasive that this small town is like, who is this stranger and why does he care about Frank and his whole family? What do you think, as Jake is intending to do a good thing, but when he gets into town, he's using like the subtlety of a sledgehammer to try and find out where this family lives and how he can maybe get involved?
Like you, when Jake decided to intervene and try to fix Harry's life when he was a child, I don't understand, to take your wording, why he started poking around like a sledgehammer. The questions that he was asking about Frank's father and to try and get to know him a little bit before he actually met him were way too invasive. I was thinking, okay, if if you want to know who Harry's father is, find him. Do ask one person where you can find this individual. Go and find him and start following him around. But you don't have to ask all these invasive questions to these townspeople, because when you ask evasive questions about someone in a small town, that gets around. So I kept thinking, oh, the past is going to fuck with him, in that the townspeople are going to tell Josh Duhamel that this guy is looking for him. And then when Jake finally meets him, something is going to happen, which something kind of did. But I'm like, there's so many other ways that you could have written this to make it not so sledgehammery. So I really didn't like that part of this episode.
Yeah, I thought, because he runs across young Harry after he gets beat up by some bullies, and he's walking through town in just his tidy whities, and he comes into the shop where Jake happens to be, and they have an interaction, and I thought, oh, this is his chance that he can not follow the kid in a creepy way, but kind of like keep tabs and try and figure out where he is. But he doesn't do that. He ends up starting to talk to the guy at the shop, and then he goes to a bar and asks a couple of questions from a bartender who ends up immediately telling Frank that this guy was asking about you. And I just was frustrated at his approach. So that bothered me. And I also started to get vibes. This is a Stephen King story. When we saw Harry get beat up, I started to wonder if this might be a Michael Myers situation where Harry was lying about what actually happened, and maybe Harry was going to be the one who murdered his entire family on Halloween. So that started to run through my mind. So I was actually nervous as the plot unfolded, but it does become pretty clear that Josh Duhamel is a piece of shit. And him and Franco have like that conversation in the bar, but before Frank arrives, Franco talks to the bartender, who's played by George McKay, who was the star of 1917. And they have like a little bit of an interaction that later that character is going to come back and have a bigger interaction. But you could tell that they were sort of laying the groundwork. And he says, oh, you better get a seat before the factory gets out. And then all the factory guys come running in. And this being shot in Canada, one of the factory guys is Ari Millen, who was on Orphan Black. He was one of the leads on Orphan Black. So he shows up, and then obviously Franco's in this awkward situation where he now has to have this face-to-face talk with Josh Duhamel after he's been asking way too many questions. And I just love when Duhamel's kind of sussing him out, and he's like, he doesn't say immediately like, hey, I know you were asking about me. He like slow plays it, but in a very sinister way. What are you thinking when they're in the car together and he's like, how the fuck do you know me and why were you asking about me? And it's kind of this very tense, awkward scene as these two guys have this interaction.
Well, when they're in the car together, it's very very uncomfortable because Josh Duhamel's cronies are in the back, and Josh Duhamel is driving the car sort of laid back, and he has his opposite hand draped over James Franco as James Franco is in the passenger seat. So I kept thinking the first time I saw this episode that Josh Duhamel was gonna like bang his head on the dashboard. I'm like, I do not feel safe right now. So that whole sequence was very very intense because my feeling was that Jake was way over his head and he was going to say one thing that triggered Josh Duhamel's character off, and Josh Duhamel was going to like beat the shit out of him or at worst kill him. So it was very very tense, the car scene. But what happens next is 100 times worse.
Again, like the tension that they build up, and just at every turn I feel like Franco is saying the wrong things. Did you start to get annoyed by that character, or do you think he's doing as good a job as he can given the circumstances?
If I'm being honest, I got a little bit annoyed with him because I'm like, dude, you're in the past. So if I was in the past, I would try and do what I needed to do, but my goal would be to make myself as invisible as I can, right? And the last thing that I would want to do is bring attention to myself. And everything that Jake was doing was bringing attention to himself, even even when he met Josh Duhamel and his cronies in the bar, right? He spends hours with them drinking, and he tells them poetry, and he reads them quotes from famous people that haven't even been born yet. But I'm like, why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you want to get a sense of what kind of asshole Josh Duhamel's character is? What's the fucking point? Because the only thing that you're doing here is digging yourself an early grave. And I'm like, but then I thought you'll have to tell me what you think about this. But then I thought maybe he's acting like this because he doesn't have all the papers from Harry, all of Harry's notebooks. But I'm like, what do Harry's notebooks have to do with him being smart and making the right decisions? That has nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, it doesn't. And he has some of the notebook. He doesn't have everything. And so we start to wonder, would he be better off if he had more plot details? But I wonder, as he starts to realize, like, he's running out of time, he needs to find a way to save this family. And we already know the concept of if you fuck with the past fucks back. So the whole time he's doing this, we're wondering what the ripple effect is going to be. And obviously he goes to the kill floor with these guys, and they immediately drop the facade of like, we're drinking buddies, we're having a good time. It becomes a much more serious thing where they're like, hey, we want you to kill this animal, pull the trigger. And he's like, I ain't doing that. And they're like, well, we need to see like what you're about and what you're made of. So do this. So we immediately now start to think, okay, Josh Duhamel definitely has a dark streak in him. This is going to be bad. And after this whole thing goes down, Franco's kind of shaken, and he realizes maybe the best way to intervene without him getting hurt in the process is to try and get the wife and the kids out of the picture so that, 8 p.m. on Halloween, they just won't be home. So when the dad comes angry to murder them, they won't be there. And so he comes up with this con. He has interactions as this goes with some of the small town folk. He rents a room from very religious people. The woman is played by Annette O'Toole from Smallville, another Canadian getting in there for the tax breaks. And he comes up with this, like, maybe they won a contest. What are you thinking as he comes up with this whole scheme to try and get the family out so that he doesn't have to? Well, what ends up ultimately happening is the thing that I jumped to immediately was like, just fucking kill the dad and let's move on. Who cares? But he tries to find a non-violent way to intervene and fix this.
I really thought that his whole idea of making his whole idea of making saying that Josh Duhamel's family has won a competition to sort of get them out of the house so they're not there on Halloween when they supposedly die was his only smart idea of this episode. But I kind of was like, okay, this is a good idea, but again, in the back of my head, I was like, okay, how is the universe going to push back on your good deed here? And the way that it happens later on, which Matt will get to, is really, really terrifying because here's the thing. I hate men who beat up women. So Josh Duhamel's, God bless Josh Duhamel for playing such a unforgivable fucking asshole. He was so disgusting that I just wanted something awful to happen to him. But to move back to your point, I really thought that Franco's idea of saying that Josh Duhamel's family won a competition to get them out of the house was a good idea. But again, I kept thinking, okay, how is this going to backfire on him? The other thing that I would like to mention, I really, really love the family that James Franco sort of stays with while he's in this small town. And the reason why I love it, there's this great scene when James Franco is talking to one of the members of the household, right? And this member of the household that James Franco is staying in goes through this story about how he killed a German soldier while he was at war and what that physically does to someone. And as a writer, I thought that was a great way to set up something that James Franco will have to do later on in the episode. No spoilers, but I just wanted to ask you, sort of out of the blue, I know it's not in order, but we never talk about things in order on this show. What do you think about that setup?
Yeah, it's a good setup because it's dramatic and it leaves the door open for like lots of different things to go on. I, like you, can't stand people who beat up women in shows, so immediately that's one of the like dirty things. So I like that they really hammer home that this guy's a dirtbag, and that if Franco is gonna go for it, later as stuff goes wrong, we aren't feeling sad that Franco has to go as far as he has to go, which I think is like an interesting balance act because it's rare that you watch a show and want a guy to commit a murder. But in this instance, I think that's sort of where we land. But part of this show, so as I said last episode, I had never actually watched this show. I thought I had, but I had never seen it. And I'm like intrigued by it, but I'm not loving it because some of the characters are pretty despicable and keep doing things that like bug the shit out of me. Even the small town people that we meet, like the overly religious people renting him the room, seems sus to me and like weird when he like everything just feels off, and I don't know if it's the time and place or if there is some Twilight Zone-y weird crap going on beyond this.
No, if I just could, just for 1 second. I mean, I do agree with you that the show has this weird kind of tinge to it that everybody in the show that Jake interacts with is sort of like they're assholes. They're either hyper religious or they're assholes. And it's I call it the Stephen King sort of thing, because a lot of characters in Stephen King's universe, a lot of them are assholes to the main characters of Stephen King's stories. So that I sort of understand where the characters that Jake is interacting with in this episode are coming from. The ultra religious angle of it is something that I don't like at all, because I don't like people who are overly religious and who throw it in your face. So that really bothered me. But I'm sorry, Matt, for stepping on you there.
No, that's exactly right. So I think Like, it's just a weird vibe in this whole town. Like, something feels off with everyone. And we do cut back to him talking to Chris Cooper about Chris Cooper's cancer. So as all this stuff is going on, they start to let us know that there is still this weird thing where he says, hey, before I went, I was fine. And when I came back, like, I was sick, but I was checked before and I was fine. So maybe staying in the past gives you the cancer, which is a question we had from last episode. And they're starting to layer that in where, like, the longer Franco stays, maybe the worse off it will be for him. But again, like, if we're doing a vibe check and I'm James Franco, I'm just like, the vibes in this town are off. Get me the hell out of here as soon as possible. Finally, it rolls around to Halloween. And this was like the really awkward. So there's a moment where Dumel finds out the ruse of the contest. And he says, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to fuck my wife? And the guy, to cover up, he's like, yeah, I'm trying to fuck your wife. Your wife doesn't realize that that's why I was doing this, but that is why I'm doing this. I want to, get with your wife, and I wanted to bring all your kids with us while I did this, which, like, makes absolutely no sense. And so Dumel's pissed, and so then Franco shows up on Halloween after he's been found out and he's been beat up and all this stuff to try and make sure that this doesn't go down. And as he's outside waiting for Dumel to show up to do the big murder, Bill, the guy he met at the bar earlier, also shows up and says, what are you doing? What are you doing here? And Franco panics and he says, I'm a time traveler and I had to come here and stop a murder because this whole family's going to die. And Bill is just like, what in the absolute hell are you talking about? But he says, but Frank killed my sister 12 years ago and murdered her. So I guess maybe you're telling me the truth that Frank might do another murder. And so then that brings up, like, okay, like, Frank has a really dark past. This guy is a bad guy, in case we were on the fence about it. But Franco stumbling to try and come up with a reason, and Franco waiting until the bad shit starts happening. Both of those things, where he's scrambling for the explanation, and the fact that he doesn't just march in the house at 7:50 and tell the wife and kids, like, you're coming with me, blew my mind. What are you thinking as he's really dropping the bag in this episode?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you how goddamn stupid I think it was that for Bill to come out of nowhere and say, "Oh, I hate Frank too. He killed my sister and her young child." Like, don't you think that's something that we should have known earlier? Seriously, that came out of nowhere.
I know.
I'm like, where the and also, you bring up another great point. Why did James Franco wait until the last possible second? Why didn't he go in the house, force Josh Dumel's wife and Josh Dumel's kids to come with him before Josh Dumel even got there? I'm like, if he does that, he's possibly saving him. He's saving himself a whole lot of conflict. And for James Franco to sort of be flustered like that when he's talking to Bill outside, and for him to say, "Oh, fine, I'll just tell you I'm from the future." What the fuck is that? Look, again, I understand that it's difficult to write TV, guys. I get that. So if you're screaming at us now for complaining, I get that. But there are certain ways to write TV that it doesn't sound unplausible.
I don't want to step on what you're saying, but I'm going to say the moment that he said that, I was like, okay, eventually I thought Bill is going to come back and they're going to somehow team up because he's going to believe that he's a time traveler. And they needed to get there, but this is just the clumsy way that they dropped it in, like tossing it off before the episode is over, because it does come back 5 minutes later. But I feel like there would be a better way you can do that feels more natural and not as rushed and like TV convenience, which this really just felt like, we need this information to get to Bill. Let's just give it to him without really finessing our way to it.
Right. Everything that Matt just said, there's an easier way to get these characters to where they need to be for the next episode. The way they did it here was just clumsy. But the one thing I will say, when James Franco ends up going in the house and he climbs up the stairs, and when he climbs up the stairs for the first time, you see Harry behind the door in his room. And I love the way that James Franco just goes over to him and says, listen, whatever you hear, don't come out of this room. And the confrontation between James Franco and Josh Duhamel, as Josh Duhamel has lost his goddamn mind and is attempting to kill his wife, is just great. And that point when James Franco takes a wire off the ground and chokes Josh Duhamel to death, I was like, God damn, this is great, but it's really violent.
Yeah, it's what you want to happen. So like, I'm cheering and I'm glad. I was again screaming at the TV when Franco rolls into that house so slow. And he's like looking around slowly. And I'm just like, charge in there, man. Like, make sure that you don't just save like one or two of them. Get in there quick to make sure you save all of them. So I know that they wanted to make the drama and have it that, you know, when he kills Frank, it's not like he went in there with the intention to kill him. He ended up being driven to that because Frank really fights back and they have a big knockdown drag out before he has to grab that. And I like the moment where Frank is pleading for the kid to give him the gun. And I'm like, oh God, please don't. And so all of that was handled well, and it's very exciting. And of course he does kill him and then comes downstairs and, like, you know, lets the family know, like, I had to do this. This was a good thing. And he even tells the religious lady, like, whatever you hear, just know it was the right thing. And she's like, only God can judge. So I thought that was interesting. And so then he's realizing, like, he's got to get the fuck out of town. Hopefully he has done the thing now where the mom and all the kids have survived. He has changed so that everyone's going to live. And as he is getting ready to get out of town, Bill shows up with a newspaper clipping about JFK being killed that Jake had left in his room and says, your time travel bullshit might not be bullshit. What is this? What? Tell me about it. And that's sort of where we leave off. What are you thinking? As, you know, we don't know what kind of kickback is going to result from Jake killing Frank and saving the family. Like, who knows? Maybe if Harry doesn't go through this trauma, he becomes the next Hitler. Like, we don't know. So are you worried about what the future is going to be like when Jake goes back?
Yeah, listen, I'm very, very concerned about how the timeline is going to be affected with Jake saving Harry's family, because I keep thinking that Jake at some point is going to have to go back to his time. And if he goes back to his time, everything that he did in the past is going to be erased. So I'm like, no matter what happens now, he's going to have to stay here, because if he doesn't stay here, everything that he's done is going to go for nothing. I really, now to address the Bill thing, when Bill found the newspaper with JFK on it, I'm like, okay, but so where did you get that from? Did you break into his house? And did you like yeah, I thought that could have been handled better. But again, I understand that the writers needed Bill to team up with Jake at some point. So I understand that. But like before, like Matt said before, I thought that the writers could have thought of a better way to do this.
They definitely could have. I feel like maybe a lot of it comes from the novel. And so, like, I haven't read the source material at all, so I don't know if that is like where we're getting this from. But there are so many times where some of the decisions and the shortcuts we take are just really frustrating to me, that it's not making me want to stop watching. But I'm like, I don't know, I feel like we didn't think some of this through. So I'm interested to see. And yeah, we are meant to assume that the dude went through his stuff and found the clipping, which is weird because he does come in as Jake is murdering Frank, and he like sees that that's happening, and then he just bolts and he doesn't stick around for the aftermath. So I'm like, what is this guy's deal? And for him to show up again at the end, you know, it's confusing. So I'm interested to see where they take it next episode with trying to explain how this guy now believes that Jake is a time traveler and how he came to get that clipping, because it's just a lot of leaps that we have to take in a very short amount of time.
You know, the other thing that doesn't make sense about Bill, when Bill found James Franco hanging right outside Josh Duhamel's house, he mentioned again that his sister was killed by Josh Duhamel's character. If that man killed my sister, I would want to stay there and watch him die. Like, his behavior in that moment was so off-putting and so weird, because why wouldn't you want to watch that, or why wouldn't you want to help?
Yeah, just the way he disappeared, I was like, was he a figment of Jake's imagination? Like, the way he was there 1 second and then gone the next, I was like, this is fucked up. So they left a lot of questions and things dangling, and I like that Jake intervened and did fix this, supposedly fixed. We'll have to see whether it stays fixed or not, but so many of the character decisions in this episode really just baffled me. I was like, what the hell? But it's a mini series, so it's going to tell a complete story over 8 episodes, so I'm willing to give it a little bit more rope, and hopefully they don't hang themselves with it.
Yeah, listen, I have a little bit of an idea of where we're going, but I seriously, I don't remember this episode being this bad. And this episode was okay, but so many decisions from a writing aspect didn't make sense to me, and that really bothered me, as well it did you, clearly. Other than that, I'm very, very excited to see what ridiculousness Jake is going to get up to next week and what dumb shit he's going to do. And I really, listen, I'm not joking. I really hope he gets smarter. This is not a joke. I really, really hope he gets smarter, because if he doesn't get smarter, he's not going to live long enough to try and stop the assassination of JFK.
Yeah, it feels like if he keeps down this road, he's going to make somebody mad or do something that he shouldn't and be taken off the board before he can survive. He's still got 3 years to go. He's still 3 years away. So, he's not been in the past that long, and he's still got a long journey. And as frustrating as a lot of the character decisions were in the episode, I did think it was a strongly directed episode, because the performances from Duhamel is pretty good. The supporting characters are interesting, if weird, and those action sequences were intense, and like I was on the edge of my seat. And this episode was directed by Frederick E.O. Toy, who, Bad Robot, this dude has worked on Alias, Lost, Undercovers, Fringe, Revolution, Westworld. He also did Watchmen, Mrs. Davis. This guy is kind of like one of the go-to guys. So if any Bad Robot project or Bad Robot adjacent is kind of getting off the ground, this guy comes in, and I know he did 2 episodes out of the 8 of this miniseries, and I thought that was pretty strong. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I didn't catch last week, but should have, because he always does it, I had mentioned that the score sounded like, Giacchino knockoff, and it does. Title music is a J.J. Abrams. He did the theme music for the title, which is one of the things that J.J. does like to do, is he loves writing a theme tune. And even on this miniseries, that opening credits theme music is written by J.J.
Yeah, so on that note, guys, that'll do it for this edition of Radio 815. Listen, guys, if you like our show at all and you want to reach out to us to tell us how awesome we are, or to give us shit or whatever at all, you can send us an email at radio815@aol.com. You can contact us on Twitter at JJUniverse815, or you can write us a comment on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/radio815, where we post all our back episodes, and we do great stuff over there too. So go over there and check us out if you don't like the regular podcast services here. But with all that out of the way, Matt, if the good folks at home want to chat with you about anything, what will be the best place for them to find you on?
On X at Matt Crandall.
You can also catch me on X. I'm at CreekFanatic88. But until next time, as I say often, we'll talk back soon.
Radio 815 is a Balloonhead Productions presentation in association with Killer Newt Productions.